Suzie. I have very many nice memories of you being on Time Team with Martin Biddle and various other people. How many Time Teams did you do, and which one was the most memorable?
Oh gosh, I did 4. So it was in 2012, which both feels like a long time ago and yesterday. And I went to the Moor, which is where Martin Biddle was, and we went to Upton Castle in Pembroke, and the Coniston Copper Mines, and Henham Park in Suffolk, where they hold the Latitude Festival, where we were looking for the Tudor house and the Georgian house. And it was the most magical time. It was just a wonderful summer, actually. It was, met some brilliant people. And whether the effigies at Upton or, thinking about Charles Brandon at Suffolk. And the thing about Time Team is it's as much fun as it looks like it is. So I also have memories from, and I don't remember where it was, but laughing my head off with Francis Pryor and Phil, after hours. And do you remember picking up a guitar? A couple of people, you had a guitar, someone else had a guitar, there was some singing and dancing one night. I think, I don't know if I'm making this up, but I think at Henham, we also all went swimming in the river at some point. I mean, it was a complete wild. So there was just, anyway, there was a lot of fun and laughter had.
When I think of historians, and I go back to Robin Bush, who was a completely sort of unreconstructed chap of his time, loved wine, cigars, and he would have his little hat on and he would bring the history to it. And he did it in his own particular way, and which we loved. But I always felt with historians that the difference between where archaeology can provide something for history and where history can provide something for archaeology. And you've done numerous programs now on television, taking historical lines and things. Where do you think being able to get your hands on the physical evidence, is that a distraction or is that helpful?
It's not a distraction. In fact, I think one of the interesting things is, and I think this is changing, but I think for me, there was a certain period of time where historians were slightly disdainful of the stuff, and had their kind of primary focus just on the documents. And, obviously there were always architectural historians and art historians who were thinking about material culture, as it's called. But I think that actually thinking about the things of history connects us emotionally much more with people of the past, and can add a sort of a layer of the texture of people's lives and place, of course, like, being where things happened. I always find that, if you go to a historic house or whatever, there is that sense of tangibility of the past, that sense that only time and not space separates you from these people. I mean, it's given me a thrill just thinking about it. It is the shivers down the spine, and and I think it's very powerful. And I think that kind of emotional connection we have to the past is to be revered as much as a kind of head connection.
I noticed your wonderful book-lined shelves behind you, and my images of Time Team historians were that we would be out there up to our necks in mud. I'd come back and you guys would be carefully leafing through documents. How did it feel to be and you normally have loads of time to do this. You can go to a library and we would throw you in, and for 3 days we needed the stuff from you by the end of the second day. What was it like being shoved into that active process of digging, looking for stuff, and 3 days to do it?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely thrilling because we were genuinely working hard back in those rooms trying to find things that you needed. So we had the luxury of often being dry and warm when you weren't, but on the other hand, you're sort of rapidly trying to find out what needs to be known, and whether the sources are going to come up with the goods or not, which is always the question. But at the same time, I mean, archaeology has a kind of magic for me. It's a kind of because you know, someone like Phil can say, well, look, you know, like in the Richmond program I've just watched, you know, there's a ghost of a wall, and I'm like, okay. You know, like he can interpret the evidence that in a way that I can't. But on the other hand, then I can interpret some other evidence for it, you know. So it was thrilling. It was thrilling being part of that time scale, and also the collective process. The thing about being a historian often is that it's quite a solitary endeavor, and Time Team was appropriately named because it very much felt like this team effort.
And I've always wondered, where does your concentration, some people might say obsession, with the Tudor Elizabethan period, where, I mean, you've done recently a book on Henry VIII, coming out in paperback, and you know, I sometimes look at do you feel like you got stuck in that period? What is it that's driving you further and further? And, you know, we've talked about Henry VIII in the past. What is the grail that is undiscovered that you want to find?
Well, the thing is, it's as you get to know a period, you discover more and more what the gaps are. So that's how you get stuck, because you find out what we don't know, you know. Like, for example, you'd think the dissolution of the monasteries, like, obviously really well known. I'm not writing about this at the moment, but actually there is no brilliant book about the dissolution of monasteries, for example. Like, there was loads of research that hasn't been properly done on it. Who would have thought? Or on, I mean, I'm giving away all my ideas now, but like on Henry VIII going to war, like there's so much to be done on Henry VIII's efforts. So anyway, so you kind of discover all the things that are gaps. So I think that is inevitable. And I actually came into it kind of accidentally. I did a doctorate on French history, and I was lucky enough to sort of win, I suppose, to be appointed a job as a curator, research curator at Hampton Court Palace. So then I skipped over the channel and, you know, went back a few decades to work on early Tudor history. And yeah, so I sort of have kind of got stuck there. I've written quite a few books about it now, but my interests are broad, and I have plans to do other things. So there are other periods that are calling to me, whispering their sweet nothings, you know. So, you know, I may defect.
I was kind of interested in, you mentioned a while ago to me that there was a particular aspect of Anne Boleyn, because you know, I feel she's almost familiar. Various people have done programs on her. I turn on the television and there's always another version of Henry VIII's trials and tribulations, because he's such a character. Mm. What was it in particular? Is there something that you're in search of related to Anne Boleyn?
Well, lots of things, but one thing I'd say particularly that's a sort of hot potato with historians is that, you know, Anne Boleyn famously is beheaded by Henry VIII, and the charges are adultery, incest, and conspiring the king's death. That much we know. Historians contest this period, though. They contest whether it's happened because Henry wants to get rid of Anne, whether it's a conspiracy led by Cromwell, whether Anne actually did the thing she's accused of. This is sort of like, so there are about 4 different historical positions, and you can look at the academic journals. Like, there are historians who have fought it out in the archives, you know, in the articles, I mean. So there's been extraordinary to and fro, and one of the reasons is because we don't have the trial documents. So all that survives at the National Archives is the indictment. But actually what happened in the trial, we have, you know, Eustace Chapuis, the Imperial Ambassador, who's there, he writes down what he remembers from it, and we have bits and scraps of other things. But we don't have the trial documents, and that could be the thing that really provides an answer. But, you know, were they destroyed? Have they been eaten by rats? You know, we have no, like, we don't know. But should those, oh gosh, should those turn up somewhere, that would be amazing. We'd all be all over them, like, you know, gannets. And
I sort of get a sense when I talk to you about that you get the same thrill about the prospect of that find of documents that have somehow made it from the past to the future, all the processes they've gone through. And I hadn't realized your sort of French connection, and you've got a book called The Voices of Nimes. And when you describe that process that you had to, reading the thing in French, ancient French, if that's the right word for it, I suddenly felt a sort of cool, calm descend on me, which was you somewhere in some place in France or UK, I don't know, with all those documents. What was it that you were looking for in them, and what revelation did you sort of get?
Yes, I mean, those are amazing because so I was working from records produced by the Protestant church in the south of France, where people converted to Protestantism. They were, in order to sort of defend themselves against the onslaught of Catholic attack, it was believed that they needed to assuage God's wrath, and they would do that by adhering to strict moral codes. And so they kept a court to police people's morals, and they sent out elders from it to, you know, go into the streets and see who's doing anything wrong. And it becomes this kind of perpetuating mechanism whereby people gossip and then things get reported. And what was fascinating for me in looking at those records, which are, you know, bound in vellum, parchment, covered with secretary hand, preserved in, you know, the little departmental archives in Nîmes or Montauban, Montpellier, some in Paris, is that that they contain details not just of how the church is operating, but they contain details of ordinary people's lives, and particularly lots of detail on women's lives. These are women who, you know, most of women who've ever lived left no record to posterity. Most of them couldn't write. In maybe 5% of women in Europe in the 16th century could write, 16th, 17th, 17th centuries. So they're not keeping diaries or letters or anything we can get, you know, they tend to not own that much. Ordinary people don't tend to leave wills, you know, so they aren't appearing in records, but they are appearing before this consistory, this church court. And so I got this amazing intelligence about, you know, things like magic and adultery and sexual assault and domestic violence, and, you know, just sometimes quite horrific insight into the details of ordinary women's lives.
It's always interesting to talk to people who are just fascinated and intelligent about the subject they're chasing. You know, we've had discussions with Kate Moss, and her research is into Catharism and the area, the Languedoc. There's a sort of thrill about the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. And to be honest, I always find it a bit of relief when we're not trying to work out, you know, where the next television program's coming from.
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, and Kate actually, and we've talked because her series of novels that she's producing at the moment, Burning Chambers, obviously one of them, was is in 16th century Languedoc. It's with the Huguenots, exactly the people I was doing my historical research on. So we've got lots to talk about there. But yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to whether you really care about this stuff or not, and I do. I mean, I know it's a slightly hopelessly optimistic agenda, but I do believe that we can get closer, at least, to finding out the truth about the past, and that's what I'm always interested in trying to, you know, uncover. So
very kindly on Time Team's behalf, we asked you to look at a fairly historic chapter in a various excavations, which was Richmond Palace, and what were your reactions? That was quite a time ago now, but we chose it because I wanted to find something near to some of your interests. So the place where Elizabeth actually died, I think. How did you feel watching Time Team from the past?
Well, it was lovely. First of all, it felt like a lovely encounter with old friends, slightly younger versions of themselves than when I knew them. Since I've known them, you know, people like Tony and Phil and Stuart. But and John, of course. But I think what was fascinating about it was it absolutely had that sense of the urgency that you have on Time Team. You're trying to do something in 3 days, and that, you know, is the genuine urgency, with also the restrictions. You know, a fourth trench was negotiated, but really it was supposed to be 3 trenches, and you were supposed to try and find it out, you know, taking up that beautiful lawn. And so there's that aspect to it as well. And then, but also the grand scale of the ambition. So trying to find something so important in this case, you know, the privy chambers of Richmond Palace. And I loved also that you were drawing on expertise like the local historian John, who came along, you know, Time Team was never snobby. It's all, you know, it was always it drew on whoever had done the best work on it. And so the other thing about it is it's just, you know, it's unpretentious. It reminded me of that glorious summer, the camaraderie, the authenticity of it. So no, I really enjoyed watching it.
What do you mean by authenticity?
I mean that so for a start, just the 3-day thing. When people look at Time Team, they're not looking at something that has been created. You know, get these tales from other television shows where somebody says they're living on an island or something, but actually they're being flown off each night to stay in a hotel. Like we were staying in hotels, or often not on site, but when it says it was doing it in 3 days, it literally was done in 3 days. It started the first day, ended, and there was it was very seriously adhered to. And so going on Time Team, you go for a week, basically. You turn up the night before, you're ready for the Tuesday morning or whatever it is, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then off you go on the Friday morning. And so that was, I mean, in terms of authenticity of time, but also authenticity in terms of how people interacted. So you don't have a kind of polished presenter version of people on Time Team. You have that is what Tony's like. That's what feels like. You know, nobody's creating a version of themselves, and so you also see, you also see. Obviously, some conversations might have happened, and you have to go back and have them again but most of the time the cameras are there as well. It's the other thing about Time Team is you always had a number of cameras, so things could be captured as they were happening, and so therefore you see the affection. Therefore, you see the affection of people for each other, and you see the joshing, and so you get this sort of wonderful sense of it as being something that's real. And I think that people care about that. They don't want to see a version of reality that's just been constructed for the cameras. You know, they want to see what's actually happening.
And was there a favourite moment in the programme that caught your eye, or you thought, oh, you know, that was a useful thing to have found out, or just a serendipitous moment?
Well, I mean, basically everything that was found. I mean, the exact position of the privy chambers, the entranceway, the extraordinary discovery that that makes absolute sense. Of course, it lines up with the outer gatehouse of Richmond that still remains through to the privy chambers. That it was brick and only the stone facings. You know, I had imagined from the pictures that I'd seen that it was a stone building, but actually, of course, it makes sense that Henry VII was building in the trendy building material of the time, which was brick. And so there were lots of wonderful details about it, and how things kept being recreated from Henry V, then Henry VII. You know, it's just a lovely kind of layer of insight into the past that you don't get from the documents I look at necessarily.
And as a historian, could you describe for me the moment of Elizabeth's death, or the moments before and up to her death at that time?
Yeah, so Elizabeth sort of refused to believe she was dying, but there's so she didn't want to sit down or to lie down because at the same time, because she secretly knew, of course, that she was. So there's a sense she's wandering around. There's stories of her kind of sucking one of her fingers. So she's really kind of disintegrating, and we have her servants running around trying to, armed with cushions in case she might fall down at any point and they need to grab her. And of course it's a moment high with tension, because the whole the story that we all know about Elizabeth is that she doesn't have any children. So there's the question of whether it's going to be this smooth transfer of power to James VI of Scotland, would soon to be James I of England, and the moment that Elizabeth dies, therefore the ring that she's been being given as a symbol of her power has to be sort of spirited off her and whisked up to Scotland for that transfer to happen whilst no one knows about her death and the whole thing's kept a secret. So you can imagine everybody's absolutely on tenterhooks trying to sort of maneuver around this old queen who can still be angered easily and may yet live and make you rue your mistakes. On the other hand, you've got to be absolutely poised for what's going to happen. So it was high tension indeed.
It would have been a brave person who decided to take that ring off her finger. I could imagine him, I presume it was a him or I don't know, reaching down, holding the ring, then her eyes open and you think, oh, whoops.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yes. Not quite dead yet. Monty Python.
Going back to historians on Time Team, when you were on Time Team, did you feel as a historian that you were listened to, that what you were doing did feed? Did you feel like you had a way back into the program in the middle of all the hectic excavation and things?
Yes, I felt the two worked very much hand in hand. I mean, we for example, were looking at some effigies in Upton Castle. I remember that quite vividly, and thinking about the dating those. I remember us, thinking about the history of Wolsey and at the Moor, and then Catherine of Aragon staying there later. So there was definitely a sense in which the what was going on a historical level was intertwining with the digging that was being done, for sure.
And how did it feel to have Martin Biddle with you on a shoot, who's one of the great and good, I think, of British archaeology?
He certainly is. It was amazing. I was really honoured to meet him. His dig at Nonsuch is the stuff of legend. So, it was just wonderful. A great honour.
One of the things we often ask people, it was two questions we asked them. What would be, is there a reason for Time Team coming back? Why bring Time Team back at this time? And what do you think about that?
Well, I imagine there's a couple of different answers to this. The first, of course, is that people love it. And they love the team. Obviously we don't have Mick anymore, but we have a great number of wonderful people who worked on Time Team, but above all, I suppose it alludes to that point I've already made about authenticity. I do feel that there's a hunger now for programs that demonstrate that kind of really honest way of making television. And I think also there's another element to that, which is that what Time Team shows you is not just the conclusions. It's not just the pat answers. It shows you the process. It shows you how evidence is used, archaeological evidence, historical evidence, how you've got a problem and you dig, literally in this case, for an answer. And I don't think that's done that much on television. Most of the time what we're getting is a story, and we love stories, and that's great. But I think people also are intrigued by the detective nature of history and archaeology, and genuinely seeing that enacted in a period of time is thrilling, because people are part of the chase.
And I'd like to ask you, this is a question we ask people because it's something we're trying to work our way through. It may be possible that some of the original team might get involved in the future. We've also got what I don't really like to call the next generation, but people who are in their 20s, 30s, that sort of mix. Do you think mixing in some of the new guys with the original team, that kind of way of doing it would work?
Well, it would work because that means that they can learn from the original team. So there's such great expertise, ways of working, sense of process, such knowledge and expertise that you would want that to be passed on to the newcomers, I suppose. And so I think working together, which Time Team in its name always does do that, and I think that would create that sense that these are the inheritors of the crown, as it were.
And if we were doing a particular period, of an area that you had a knowledge in, and we needed a historian. Do you think you might be available for something like that?
I would jump at the chance. I mean, my memories of working on Time Team are so warm. I absolutely adored it. It was just so much fun, and it's interesting. You know, as I did 4 Time Team shoots, and you know, I have a card sitting here on my desk from Tony. Like I have, I've stayed friends with a couple of the, you know, some of the producers like Kellen Williams, Sean Prush, people like Raksha Dave, Rob Hedge. You know, the friendships that came out of it have been profound, and that's just from 4 different shoots. So I loved it, and I would be, I'd be very, very happy to work on it again.
Well, I have to say, Susie, it'd be very nice to have you on a Time Team shoot. I always like that sensation of taking historians and giving them quite difficult problems to solve in 3 days and throwing them at the documents and say, oh, we've got to go and dig a hole, but you need to tell us this by, 2 o'clock tomorrow. And it was a very enjoyable experience. And I think historians are very important. They represent a thread of the known history. And from that, sometimes there's still stuff we don't know about yet. If you had one site, I'm going to give you Time Team for a week. You can have everything you want, the geophysics, the helicopters, the science, anything you like. And I'm going to let you take them to one particular site. It's your fantasy Time Team dig, so it can be anybody. You can choose who you want. Where do you think you'd like to take them to?
So picking up on the Time Team special we did on Henry VIII's Lost Palaces, I would like to take you to somewhere which I think would have been marked a lot more this year if we hadn't had a pandemic, which is to the Field of Cloth of Gold. So there are Tudor surveys, there are sort of 15 contemporary maps. There's an amazing painting at Hampton Court of this meeting between the English and French kings, 3 weeks, a sort of Tudor party without parallel that happens on English soil in northern France. And we know that there was the castle of Guienne, and there was a temporary royal palace, and this is all part of the Tudor lands around Calais, although at the time they called it Calais, like to rhyme with Alice. Anyway, so what we could perhaps identify are some of the defences of Calais, some of maybe the castle of Guienne, the exact location, maybe even this temporary palace of brick and timber and glass that's thrown up for Henry VIII. It must have been scrambled down quite quickly. Some of it might have been left behind. It might be a fantasy dig, because I'm not quite certainly if some of the fields on which the Field of Cloth Gold happened are still there. I don't know if some of it is now under tarmac. I don't know, but that would be amazing.
Funnily enough, we actually researched quite a bit about that site, and for anybody listening in, that picture of Henry visiting that site, I mean, we're not talking about a picnic site here. We're talking about the recreation of a city with wooden beams, all sorts of things, and it's a Hampton Court picture, and it's an amazing thing to look at, and I think that would be very interesting. I don't know how the French authorities would feel about it, but what would be fascinating would be to take your French knowledge and background and research and look at it from the French point of view.
Look at it from the French point of view, yes. I mean, the 12,000 people turned up, which was the size of, the second largest city in England at the time. It was huge. It was huge. So yes, we mapped, and absolutely looking at the French sources as well as the English sources would be very, very clever to get into their perspective. One of their greatest kings from the French point of view, Francis I, François Ier, and his wife Claude, who were there meeting with the English delegation. Yes, that would be the way to do it.
And I love the fact that the two kings were somehow trying to outdo each other in splendor, what they could arrive with. So everybody, really went for it. The golden turrets and towers, and it was the biggest show off between the two kings, which you'd think there's got to be some remnants there. So I think we should definitely look at that and put it. We have a list of fantasy digs, and we're putting some research into them. So at some point in the future, I would like you to be on a Time Team in France, having researched the records, and we will do a bit of digging on the field of cloth of gold, and it would be lovely to have you there.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Suzie, thanks very much for joining us on another Time Team Tea Time, and I look forward to your next book and your next appearance, which I think may be with the Smithsonian or one of the channels, which I'm sure would be fantastic. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Tim. Lovely to talk to you.